Welcome to Gurukul Live Lectures. I am Professor Namita Rajput, Professor in Department of Commerce, Sri Aurobindo College, University of Delhi. In the ongoing series of corporate governance, today we are going to talk on the reforms post-scams as far as the global perspective and the Indian perspective is concerned. Now let's do some comparative analysis and the lesson learned after the effectiveness of the reforms post-scams. So, in the aftermaths of the major corporate scandals in United States, in India, in Germany, the governments and the regulatory bodies have often responded with the significant reforms aimed at strengthening the corporate governance. These reforms typically involve changes in the laws, regulation and oversight mechanisms to prevent the future misconduct. The key regulatory changes across the different jurisdictions like Surveillance-Auxiliary Act of 2002 was a landmark regulatory change followed by a scandal. So, SOX introduced the stringent requirement for financial disclosure, internal control and the auditor independence. It is also established that the Public Company Accountability Oversight Board to oversee the audits of the public companies. In India, the Companies Act of 2013, alongside the introduction of the Security Exchange Board of India, followed by a big scandal in India, these reforms aim to enhance the transparency, improve the board accountability and strengthen the role of the independent directors. So, additionally, the implementation of the mandatory whistleblowing mechanism and establishment of the National Financial Reporting Authority, that is NFRA, was a significant step towards improved the oversight. In Germany, in response to a big scandal, Germany and the European Union introduced a stricter emission standards and enhanced the oversight of the vehicle testing. The EU also revised its regulatory framework with the General Data Protection Regulation to ensure that the greater accountability in the corporate practices related to the consumer data and the privacy. The long-term impact on the corporate governance. The effectiveness of these reforms can be evaluated by examining their impact on the corporate governance practices over time. Enhanced transparency. The introduction of a stricter disclosure requirement has generally led to the improved transparency in the financial reporting. For example, the SOX of the US has credited with making the financial statements more reliable, thereby restoring the investor confidence. The strengthened board accountability. Reforms have typically aimed to make the board of directors more accountable to the shareholders and other stakeholders, and the increased role of independent directors as seen in both US and the Indian reforms, which has been a very critical factor in enforcing the board oversight. The post-reforms, many corporations have adopted a more robust risk management practices. This has been particularly evident in the sectors like banking and finance, where the reforms have enforced a stricter capital requirement and the risk assessment protocols. Now, one of the criticism of those reforms, particularly the SOX, has been high cost of compliance, especially for the smaller companies. Now, these costs can sometimes outweigh the benefits, leading to the debate about the proportionality of such regulations. The regulatory arbitrage. The global corporations sometimes engage in regulatory arbitrage, exploiting the differences in regulations across the countries. This can undermine the effectiveness of the national level reforms. The cultural and the ethical challenges. While regulatory changes can enforce the compliance, fostering an ethical corporate culture remains challenging. The scandals have continued to occur post-reforms, indicating the law alone are insufficient without a corresponding shift in the corporate culture. Let's see some future policies. There are some recommendations for the future governance framework. Based on the analysis of the past reforms and their long-term impact, there are several recommendations which can be made for the development of the future governance framework. The uniform codes and the standards. There is a growing need for the global coordination in the corporate governance standards and the organizations like the Internal Organization of Security Commission, that is IOSCO, and the Financial Stability Board, that is FSB. They should work towards harmonizing the regulation across the jurisdictions to reduce the regulatory arbitrage and create a level playing field. The cross-border oversight. The multinational corporations should be subject to consistent oversight across the countries in which they operate. This can be achieved through the international agreement that establish the minimum governance standards. The integration of the ESG factors, that is environmental, social and the governance factors. The future governance framework should integrate the ESG factors into the core of the corporate governance. This includes the mandatory reporting on the financial impact, the social responsibility and the governance practices with a very clear standards and the benchmarks. The corporations should be enforced to engage more broadly with the stakeholders, including the employees, communities and environmental groups, rather than focusing solely on the shareholders. This can help ensure that the corporate practices align with the broader societal goals. The ethics, training and the leadership. The corporate governance framework should require a regular ethics training for all the employees with a particular focus on the leadership. The corporate leaders should be held accountable not just for the financial performance but also for fostering an ethical workplace culture. The Whistleblower Protection Act. Strengthening the whistleblower protection is very critical to encouraging the reporting of unethical practices, and the future reforms should ensure that the whistleblowers are protected from retaliation and are provided with a very clear, confidential and challenges to report any kind of misconduct. Now, the next important aspect is the use of technology in the governance, AI and the data analytics. Leveraging the technology such as the artificial intelligence and the data analytics can enhance the monitoring of the corporate practices and the detection of the irregularities. The regulators should ensure the adoption of these technologies while ensuring that they are used ethically. The blockchain for transparency. The blockchain technology can be used to enhance the transparency in the corporate governance by creating the immutable records of the transactions and decisions. The future governance framework should explore the potential of blockchain to improve the transparency and accountability. The next is your continuous review and adaptation. The dynamic regulatory framework. The governance framework should be dynamic with the regular reviews to adapt to the changing business environment. This includes being responsive to the new risks, such as those emerging from the digital transformation, cybersecurity threats and the climate change. The inclusive policy making is another aspect. The policy makers should adopt a more inclusive approach to developing the governance framework, including a wide range of stakeholders, including the small business, the NGOs, the consumer groups, to ensure that the regulations are very fair and effective. So, in conclusion, we can say, while post-scandal reforms have brought a significant improvement to the corporate governance, future policies and it must address evolving the challenges of the globalization, technological advancement and the societal expectations. A holistic approach that integrates the ethical considerations, the global coordination and the technological innovation will be very essential for building a robust governance framework that can prevent a future corporate misconduct and promoting a long-term sustainability. The future policies for effective governance. The emerging trends and challenges in the governance. The future policies in the governance must address the dynamic challenges posed by the technological advancements, globalization, environmental concerns and evolving societal expectations. There are some key areas where policies must adapt include a digital transformation. With the rise of the digital technologies such as the AI, blockchain, big data, governance framework, it needs to incorporate the policies that ensure a data privacy, cybersecurity, and the ethical use of technology. Now, the globalization and the cross-border operations. As the companies operate globally, the governance policies should address the complexities of managing the operations across the diverse regulatory environment. This includes harmonizing the standards across the borders and ensuring the compliance with the international laws. Sustainability and the ESG. Future policies must integrate ESG considerations into the governance framework, promoting sustainability, social responsibility, and the ethical governance as the core business practices. The workforce diversity and inclusion. The policies should enforce the diversity and inclusion at all the levels of an organization, ensuring that the board and the leadership teams reflect the diversity of the workforce and the customer base. To address these challenges, the following policy recommendations can help strengthen the governance framework. Mandating the ESG reporting. The government and the regulators should require the companies to report on their ESG performance, making it a standard part of the corporate disclosure. And this ensures that the companies are accountable for their impact on the society and their environment. Enhancing protections for the whistleblowers encourages the reporting of unethical behavior without the fear of retaliation. Policies should ensure that the whistleblowers are protected by law and incentivized to come forward. National and international governance codes should be regularly updated to reflect the latest best practices, including the use of technology in governance, enhanced board oversight, and the stakeholder engagement. Policies should require the companies to adopt integrated risk management framework that encompasses the financial, operational, strategic, and the reputational risk. This holistic approach ensures that all the potential risks are identified and managed proactively. The next important aspect is your encouraging a long-term value creation. The regulations should incentivize the companies to focus on a long-term value creation rather than short-term profits. This can be achieved through tax incentives, revised executive compensation structure, and the shareholder engagement initiatives. Now, there are some recommendations for a robust governance framework. Let's dwell into that. The first and the foremost, we are going to talk on the core principles of the good governance. A robust governance framework is built on the following core principles, out of which the first is your transparency, ensuring that all the relevant information is disclosed accurately and timely to the stakeholders. This includes the financial performance, risk management practices, and the decision-making process. Clearly defining the role and responsibility within the organization, particularly at the board and the executive levels, to ensure that the individuals are held accountable for their actions. The next is your fairness, treating all the stakeholders equitably, including the shareholder, employee, customer, and the wider community. This principle emphasizes the importance of ethical conduct and the equal treatment. Another important aspect we are going to talk is the responsibility, ensuring that the organization fulfill its obligations to all the stakeholders and operate in a socially and environmentally responsible manner. Now, there are some future policies which should be kept in mind, like a key component of the corporate governance. There has to be a robust governance framework, and that robust framework should include the following components. The first is your board composition and the structure. A diverse and independent board is very crucial critical factor for the effective governance. The board should include the members with a varied experience, background, perspectives to enhance the decision making and the oversight. The executive compensation and the incentives. The compensation structures should align with the long-term organizational goals rather than the short-term financial performance. Incentives should be linked to achieve the sustainable growth and managing the risk effectively. The risk management and the internal control. A strong governance framework requires a comprehensive risk management process, including a regular assessment, audits, and internal control to identify and mitigate the risk. There are some stakeholders engagement. Engaging with the stakeholder is very essential for understanding their concerns and the expectations. This can be achieved through a regular communication, survey, and advisory committee. The ethical standards and compliance. Establishing a code of conduct and ensuring that all the employees adhere to the ethical standards is very vital for maintaining the integrity within the organization. The compliance with the laws and the regulation must be monitored and enforced. The next is your prevention measures to avoid the future scandals. Preventing scandals requires a proactive approach to the risk management, and the organizations should implement the following measures. Early detection system. They must develop and deploy the systems that can detect the early warning signals of the potential governance failures like financial irregularities, compliance breaches, or unethical behavior. The regular audits and assessment. To conduct a frequent internal and external audits to assess the compliance with the governance standards and identify the areas for improvement. The audit should be independent, objective, to ensure that the unbiased results are there. Scenario planning and stress testing. Engage in scenario planning to anticipate the potential crises and their impact on the organization. The stress testing for the governance systems can actually help develop and the vulnerabilities and prepare for the adverse scenarios. Build a culture of integrity. We need to cultivate an organization culture that prioritizes the ethical behavior and the transparency. It also involves the regular training, clear communication of values, and leadership by example. Now, continuous improvement. The governance framework should not be very static. Organizations must continuously review, improve their governance practices in response to changes in the external environment and the internal operations. The role of regulation board and the stakeholders in ensuring a good governance. The regulators play a very crucial role in setting and enforcing the governance standards. Their responsibility include setting of the standards. The regulatory establish the legal and the regulatory framework within which the organizations must operate. This includes the corporate governance codes, disclosure requirement, and the compliance regulations. Monitoring compliance. Regulators are responsible for monitoring the organization adherence to the governance standards. This includes conducting the investigation, audits, and review to the ensuring of the compliance. Enforcing accountability. When the governance failure occurs, regulators must enforce the accountability through the penalties, sanctions, and other corrective measures. This will help deter any kind of misconduct and promotes the adherence to the governance standards. Facilitating the international cooperation. Given the global nature of many business, regulators must collaborate internationally to harmonize the governance standards and ensure the consistent enforcement across borders. The next is your board of directors. The board of directors are the stewards of the governance within the organization. Their role includes the oversight of mismanagement. So, basically the board is responsible for any overseeing the actions of the executive management team, which ensures that they act in the best interest of the organization and its stakeholders. Strategic direction. The board sets the strategic direction of the organization, making decisions that shape its long-term growth and sustainability. The risk management. The board must ensure that a robust risk management framework is in place and that the risks are appropriately managed. The performance evaluation. The board are responsible for evaluating the performance of CEO and other top executives, ensuring that their compensation aligns with the organizational goals. Ethical leadership. The board must lead by example, demonstrating a commitment to ethical conduct and integrating in all aspects of the governance. The stakeholders. The stakeholders, including the shareholder, employees, customers, and the community, have a vital role in the governance, holding the board accountable. The shareholders, in particular, they have the power to hold the board accountable for its decisions through the voting rights, shareholder proposals, and other mechanisms. Engaging in dialogue. Stakeholder should engage in ongoing dialogue with the organization to express their views and concerns. This can be facilitated through surveys, meetings, and advisory panel. Advocating for change. When the governance failures occur, the stakeholders can advocate for change in leadership, strategy, or practices to restore the trust and ensure a future success. Promoting the social responsibility. Stakeholders can push organizations to adopt more socially responsible practices, aligning the business operations with the broader societal goals. In the rapidly evolving global marketplace, organizations are increasingly exposed to the various risks, from the financial irregularities to the ethical breaches. A robust governance framework serves as the critical infrastructure that supports the organization's ability to navigate these risks effectively. It provides a set of principles, policies, and procedures that guide the organization in its decision-making process, ensuring that all the actions are aligned with the legal requirement, ethical standards, and the stakeholder expectation. So, we will now be talking on some important thoughts. One of the key advantages of a strong governance framework is its role in establishing accountability at every level of the organization by clearly delineating the role and responsibility. It also ensures that decisions are made with the appropriate level of oversight, and those responsible for actions are held accountable for their outcomes. This accountability fosters a very deep culture of responsibility, where employees understand the importance of their decisions and actions within the broader context of the organization, mission, and the value system. Now, a robust governance framework, it ensures transparency, which is very crucial for building and maintaining the trust and the stakeholders. So, transparent operations, it also allows the stakeholders, as the investors, customers, employees, or the public, to have a confidence that the organization is being managed in a way that is very fair, ethical, and in line with the best practices. This trust is not only fundamental to the maintaining a very positive reputation, but also a competitive advantage in attracting and retaining the investors, customers, and the top talent. Now, we talk about some preventive measures to avoid the future scandals. Preventive measures are the proactive steps, and the organizations need to take it to identify, mitigate, and manage the risk before they escalate into scandals or the crisis. Now, these measures are very integral to any effective governance framework and should be continuously adapted to address the new and emerging risk in the business environment. One of the most effective preventive measures is the implementation of a rigorous internal control. And these controls include a regular financial audit, compliance checks, and the risk assessment that help identify the potential vulnerabilities within the organization. By continuously monitoring and assessing these areas, the companies can detect and address the issues early, preventing them from developing into significant problems. Another critical preventive measure is the establishment of a strong ethical culture, and this begins with the leadership setting a very clear and consistent example of the ethical behavior. When the leaders demonstrate a commitment to integrity, it sets the tone for the rest of the organization. Ethical training programs are also essential, ensuring that the employees understand the ethical standards expected out of them and are equipped with making decisions that align with these standards. Whistleblower protection programs are another vital component of preventive measures, and these programs provide employees with the safe channels to report unethical behavior and any kind of breaches of conduct without any fear of retaliation. Encouraging and preventing the whistleblowers can bring a potential issue to light before they become a public scandals, allowing the organization to address them internally. The use of technology and the data analytics also plays a very increasing important role in the prevention. Advanced analysis can identify the patterns or anomalies that suggest the potential risk, allowing for early intervention. For example, the data analytics can help detect the irregularities in the financial transactions that may indicate a fraud or a corruption, enabling the organization to investigate and take the corrective action very swiftly. The role of the regulator, board and stakeholders in ensuring a good governance. Basically, the responsibility of ensuring the good governance does not rest solely within the organization, and it is a collective effort that involves regulators, board of directors and the various stakeholders. Each of these groups plays a very unique and vital role in maintaining the integrity and effectiveness of the governance practices. Regulators are the external bodies that establish the legal and the regulatory framework within the organizations, and it must operate. So, their role is to protect the public interest by setting the standards for the ethical conduct, financial reporting, and the regulators also have the authority to enforce these standards, imposing the penalties for the non-compliance and ensuring that the organizations adhere to the rules designed to promote the transparency, fairness, and accountability. Thank you very much.